Alrighty then. If we captured the spirit of that opening treatment, we have the essence of the idea for today. And the title of the talk is Today is the Tomorrow that you created yesterday. Kind of a play on words of an old kind of axiom. But today is the tomorrow that you created yesterday. And what we want to remember is we want to remember that the power that responds to us according to our belief is always working. Whether we are conscious and aware of the fact that it is working or not, it doesn't matter. It's working. Our hearts beat whether we are aware that they are beating or not. Gravity works whether we are aware that gravity is working or not. And that power is working whether we have carefully, deliberately, consciously placed into it that which we would experience, or whether we have carelessly, unconsciously, absent-mindedly placed into it old ideas, old habits, old patterns, old structures of thought. And that's the reason for much of life that today looks a whole lot like yesterday. And yesterday looks a whole lot like the day before, and so on and so on and so on. It's because we human beings have not done that which we have been created to do, that which only we can do, no one can do for us, and that is to become conscious co-creators of the life that God is living in us, as us, and through us. So this week I was watching some videos on the internet about songwriting. One of the things that I wanted to explore when I had time after I retired was music and music theory. I shared this with some of the folks on Wednesday as well. You know, I've learned to play the guitar when I was a teenager, and mechanically I could read music and I could play the notes and I could make the chords and all those kind of things. But it's always kind of intrigued me, how does music work? How is it that music seems to interact with human emotion? You know, how is it that we can listen to some songs and we believe it's a happy song? We listen to other songs and we believe it's a sad song. And you know, some songs are inspirational and people listen to them and they get up and they march off to war. And you know, there's just something about the human spirit that can be moved by music, and I'm kind of curious about that. So I'm exploring that. And a couple of ideas that occurred in one of the, that came up in one of the lectures that I was listening to this week fit perfectly in this idea that we were talking about today, which is we are creating tomorrow, but we are creating it today. And how much care are we putting into that? You know, how much attention are we paying to what we're creating? So one of the ideas that came up in the class is this idea of tension and release. Tension and release. There are certain musical notes that don't quite fit well together. They just don't quite go well together. And if a composer uses those notes in a composition, it creates what they call a dissonance. It creates a tension. It creates an irritation. It creates something that we, as human beings, we want resolved. We want that tension resolved. And then the composer will go and close the piece by bringing it back into harmony, into consonance. So this idea of tension and release, this idea that as human beings, when we come to face tension, when we come to it, we want that release. We will tend to go back to something that we are familiar with, that doesn't have the tension. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, about how we our lives are led. Our lives are led because in many cases, what we're trying to do is follow the path of least resistance. Robert Fritz talks about this in one of the books he wrote by that same title, The Path of Least Resistance. And we used it in corporate America in workshops. We use it in church and workshops. And it is really a book about change. It is a book about change. And the way he starts off is he talks about Boston. His office for his company is in Boston. He said sometimes people would come to visit him, and they would complain about the streets in Boston. I don't know if any of you have ever driven around Boston, but it is an experience. I used to tell people the two worst cities in America that I ever drove in were Boston and Phoenix. And if you ever go to Phoenix, by the way, and you're stopped at a red light, when it turns green, don't go. Don't go until at least 3 cars have run the red light in the other direction, then proceed with caution. And that's why Phoenix was bad. But Boston was just confusing. If you're not from there, you don't know how the streets are laid out, and they don't seem to go in any particular direction. They kind of meander all over the place, you know, and it's very difficult to, until you kind of get acclimated to the city and the way it's laid out. It's kind of tough to find your way around. And while you're trying to figure out where you're going and how you're going to get there, of course, all of the natives who understand, they've been driving here for a long time, they're blowing their horn at you and zipping by you and doing all kinds of obscene gestures at you to let you know that they disapprove of the way that you're driving. But Robert Fritz said that people would come to him and they would say, you know, why are the streets in Boston laid out like this? This is just kind of crazy. They kind of go all over, they wander all over the place. And the answer is very simple. The streets in Boston, the way they're laid out, they follow the paths that the cattle made from the first European settlers. When the first European settlers came to this country and started raising cattle, the cattle would wander, you know, through the pastures, and they would make what we come to call a cow path. And eventually the roads and the trails that the people used followed the paths that the cows made. Now, when the cows made a path, what they would do is wherever they were, the next step that they would take would be the easiest one to take. You know, so they might be at the bottom of the hill and they wanted to get to the top of the hill, but instead of going straight up the steepest part of the hill, they would take whatever step was easiest next, and then the next, and then the next. And eventually they would find a way that would meander around the side of the hill and eventually get up to the top of the hill. But every step along the way was kind of the easiest one to take at that moment in time, at that time, and at that place. It was the path of least resistance. And what Fritz was pointing out to people is that the roads that are in Boston today, the roads that people are driving on today, were basically designed by a 17th century cow as the path of least resistance. And people didn't change that. When people came along, it was easier for them to follow, to follow the tread-worn path that the cattle had made than it was for them to try to go out and lay out a new grid and create new roads. And you can see this all over the country. If you study the history of the East Coast, they have what they call the Great Wagon Roads, which before that were called the Great Warrior Roads or the Great Indian Trading Paths, which were paths that had been used for thousands of years. But they were originally created by the woods buffalo. On the East Coast, there actually were buffalo at one time, woods buffalo. And as they would wander, they would do the same thing. They would find the path of least resistance and they would take it. And this is how the paths through the mountain passes could be discovered and were known to the Aboriginal people who lived here. They were able to read the sign and see where the animals were going and know that there was an easier way to get across than going up and over the mountain to follow this meandering path that would wander through crevices and through openings in the mountain. And if you've ever been out west to Denver, up in the Rocky Mountain National Park, which is just a little bit north of Denver, up around Estes Park, there's a road up there that is touted as being the highest paved road in the nation, and it goes from one side of the park to the other. And I think nowhere on the road does it get less than 10,000 feet above sea level. In some places it might go up higher. And if you've ever been on that road, not only is it a spectacular view, it's hard to not drive off the road. It's just so breathtaking. But it meanders and it wanders, and somehow this road, even though you're surrounded by these peaks of mountains going up above 14,000 feet, this road kind of finds its way through the easiest way to get from one side of the park to the other. Again, the path of least resistance, and again, it was created by animals who are simply taking one step at a time. Now we're going to come back to this idea of the path of least resistance in just a little bit. Now, what we want to consider is we need to understand that you and I are constantly creating. There is a power in the universe that responds to us exactly according to our belief. That is kind of the underlying tenet of what we teach. Dr. Holmes had a TV program in the 50s, and if you go on YouTube and search for Ernest Holmes, you'll actually find there's a recording of one of the shows. It's about a 20-minute recording of one of his TV shows in black and white from the 50s. And he had a radio program before that, and he would always start the program and he would say, there is a power for good in the universe, and you can use it. There is a power for good in the universe, and you can use it. You can use it. There is a power for good in the universe, and you can use it. And that has a great appeal to people. In fact, some of the traditional religions that would speak against religious science would say, well, it's just appealing to people's desire to be in control. All you're doing is telling people, well, you have more control than you have realized. You can create the circumstances of your life, and that has a natural appeal to people, and it does. It does have a natural appeal to people. There are certain things in the human experience that seem to be almost universal, and that's another thing that kind of came up in the songwriting lectures was, why is it that some songs last for hundreds of years, some even more, and some songs just come and go in a flash? They're here and they're there, and some songs never make it. And the gentleman who was given the lecture, the songwriting lecture, was asking the class to identify in one word the feeling they would get when they heard a certain lyric or they heard a certain melody. And he used an example, and I had never thought of this. He used the example of Somewhere Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, why can't I? And that song's been around for 70 years, and not too many years ago, somebody redid it with a different beat, with like a Hawaiian beat or a reggae beat, and it became popular all over again. And he was asking the class, he said, why? What is it? What is it about that song? What is the feeling that song evokes within you? And then maybe we can understand why this song had lasted so long. And it had never occurred to me. I mean, I've heard the song ever since I was a kid, and it never occurred to me. Someone said, well, the song is hopeful. There's a better place. See, there's a better place, and we can get to it. And we're not quite satisfied with where we are. But there's a better place, and we can get to it over the rainbow. Kind of the tension and the release, the tension and the release. And then somebody else said, oh, well, to me, what it is, it's a yearning. It's a yearning. And the human heart yearns. And you could kind of hear a collective, people's heads nodding in the class. A yearning. There's something about the human heart that yearns. There's something about the human heart that kind of looks at today and knows that there's a better tomorrow. See? We know that there's a better tomorrow. There's a better place. In traditional theology, it would be heaven. You have to live until you die, but when you die, you get to heaven. And when we get up to heaven, we're going to have all of the things that we never had while we were here on earth. You know, the spiritual song, when I get up to heaven, I'm going to put on my shoes. I'm going to walk all over God's heaven. So if we don't have shoes here, we're going to have shoes when we get to heaven. So there's this human desire, there's this longing for a better tomorrow, a yearning for a better tomorrow, and it resonates in the human heart. And just like the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow kind of maybe touches that in people, and that's the appeal that it has, this idea that you and I have the ability to influence our future, to take dominion in biblical terms, to take dominion of our circumstances, to work with this power that creates according to our belief. It appeals to this human desire to be in control, to this human desire to have dominion. And while it may be true that there is a human desire to feel as if we're in control and to have dominion, and while it is true that there is a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, what we must come to understand is that we won't have and can't have dominion unless we consciously exercise it. It's one thing to say that I have the ability to change my belief. I have the ability to change my thinking and change my life. And it's another to do it. It's another to do it. So what tends to happen, as Robert Fritz told us, there's an underlying structure. There's an underlying structure to the roads in Boston, and that underlying structure was created by the animal's desire to take the path of least resistance. And with each and every one of us in our minds, mostly in our subconscious mind, there is an underlying structure of the way things ought to be that we have created through our past experiences, our observations, our inferences, our beliefs, what we've been taught, and also what we have absorbed from the race consciousness. Dr. Holmes called it the race consciousness, the consciousness of the human race. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. But we are connected. We are all connected through this collective consciousness, and we absorb ideas of what is the path of least resistance, what is the thing that we ought to or should do. And it tends to affect the way that we live and the way that we choose and the things that we do. So there is this underlying structure that we have that is there. We have this longing for something different, for something better. And we don't quite accept or realize or act as if we realized that what we have is a result of that underlying structure. And we could change that if we wanted to. See, we could change that. Now, if you've been in Boston and then you've gone out to Denver, you're just completely a contrast of the way that you'll observe the way that the roads are laid out, because by the time the Europeans got out west, they were laying out their cities absolutely in a grid where the roads went north and south and the avenues went east and west. And they would go east and west as far as you could see. In fact, Colfax Avenue in Denver is the longest continuous paved road in the United States. You can go from Denver to Boulder, Colorado, which is a distance of over 30 miles, and you will find the same street name running north and south in Boulder as it did in Denver. And if you pulled out a map and drew a line directly south from Boulder, it would intersect and line up perfectly with that same street name in Denver. It Everything was laid out according to a grid. Not necessarily the path of least resistance, but a path that was of a deliberate choosing of the planners and the surveyors and the people who were laying out. So where does this all come together? What does this all mean? And what this means to us is that you and I, because we have been created in the image and the likeness of the divine. This is Thomas Troward's The Creative Process in the Individual. And if you haven't read Troward, excuse me, I highly suggest that you find this book. It's got to be available for free on the internet. It was written in the early 1900s or late 1800s. And Dr. Holmes expands on Troward's ideas and repeats Troward's ideas, and it is basically that the only creative power in the universe is mind, capital M-I-N-D. And that's not what you and I think of as brain, and it's not what you and I might think of as our consciousness. It is a word that means God, capital M-I-N-D. But what it means is that the way that the divine creates is an act of consciousness, a mental act. It is a movement first within mind. And this is represented to us in the creation myths of many cultures. In the book of Genesis, it says, in the beginning there was void and there was chaos. Right? Things weren't like they are today. But then the Spirit spoke, and it moved the face of the waters. And there was creation. So God said, let there be. And something acted upon that, let it there be, and made it so, and did whatever needed to be done in order to make it so. And what Troward tells us is that what is true in the big picture, the macrocosm, is true in the little picture, the microcosm. And that we are created in that image and likeness, and we are mental beings. And we have the power and the ability to choose and to decide and to direct. And when we do, that same power that responded to the divine by creating the stars and the planets and the earth and us responds to us. But the flip side of that is that even if we do not consciously choose, that power is still reacting and responding to us according to our deepest belief, whether we are aware of that deepest belief or not. Let me talk for a minute about responsibility and accountability. Responsibility means that whoever is responsible had the ability to respond, was able to do something in whatever situation we're talking about. Accountability means the person who gets to experience the consequences, either positive or negative, of doing or not doing what that person was responsible for. I'll give you an example. You've all seen the Dunkin' booth at the state fair, you know, or your company picnic, where somebody goes and sits in the Dunkin' booth and there's a little target and somebody throws a softball at that target, and if they hit the target, the lever trips and the person drops in the dunk tank. Now suppose you're sitting there in the dunk tank, you're the one in the dunk tank, and your friend is standing in front of the target with a catcher's mitt. And your friend is going to catch these balls as the people are throwing them at the target. Now they have the responsibility of catching the ball to keep that ball from hitting the target. But if they walk away, if they take a break, you know, or if they get distracted, or if they start talking to somebody, and someone picks up the softball and throws it at the target and hits the target, you're the one that's going in the dunking booth. You're the one that's going to drop in the water. You are accountable. You are experiencing the consequences. They are responsible. They are the ones who had the ability to respond and to stop that ball from hitting the target. So in that example, the accountability and the responsibility are misaligned. Right? The one who is responsible, if they don't do their job, they're not the one going in the dunking booth. And conversely, the one in the dunking booth is absolutely hopeless in terms of there's nothing you can do in a dunking booth to stop people from hitting that target. There's just not. So it's misaligned, you see. And if you look at our society, if you look at what's going on, a lot of the issues that we deal with in our society are because this whole idea of responsibility and accountability are misaligned. You'll hear the politicians, a long time ago, President Reagan stood up to the microphone, many of us remember it, and he says, well, I'm responsible. It happened on my watch. And I think he was talking about Iran-Contra at the time. And you'll see politicians do this. A scandal comes up and they say, well, I'm responsible. I'm the highest elected official in this state or country or whatever happens to be. But then when you ask who's accountable, who's going to experience the consequences for doing this? Well, it's not them. Not them. Nope. They're responsible. They stood up and they did the responsible thing. They told the world that they were responsible. When you ask, well, what does that mean? Are you going to resign, or what consequences are you going to have because of this? None. Then they become helpless victims. You see. Then they say, well, even though I was responsible, I didn't have anything to do with it. Somebody working down in the lower level of my organization was doing all these things without my understanding, and they're the ones that really need to be held accountable. But I'm responsible. So in that case, they're just using that phrase, "I'm responsible," because it happened on my watch. They're using that as a way of kind of trying to diffuse the criticism, and nobody ever really gets to the point and say, well, why didn't you know what was going on? What kind of an organization are you running that you don't know what's going on? So my point here is that in our society, we have come to understand that if we can somehow separate responsibility and accountability from one another, we really don't have to change. We really don't have to do the hard work of change. Something goes wrong, we just blame another. And our society thinks as long as we find somebody to blame, well, we're done, we're finished. Yeah, somebody screwed up and we fired them. That's it, we're done. And of course, what happens there is the root cause of the problem never gets addressed. And this is what Fritz is telling, and I realize I'm jumping back and forth a bit here, but it's all related. So what Fritz is trying to tell us is that when we try to make a change in our lives, if we don't try to change the underlying structure, the change will be temporary at best. So if we're standing at the bottom of a hill in Boston and we want to go directly to the top of that hill, and we begin marching straight uphill, we can do that for a while. We can do that by sheer willpower. And a lot of your self-help programs are like that. They're about sheer willpower. I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to decide and I'm going to make this happen and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And they never address changing the underlying structure. So what happens is if you try to make that cow go straight up the hill, you may be able to make that cow go straight up the hill for a couple of days while you're standing there walking alongside of it, poking it with a shepherd's staff or leading it on its harness or doing something like that to make sure that it stays where you want it to go. And this is kind of your willpower trying to make you do what you have will to do. But as soon as you take your time and your attention and your energy away, that cow is going to go back to what the underlying structure dictates. You and I have developed an underlying structure in our consciousness just through the experience of living and through the experiences we had before we got here, through the experiences that we absorb from the collective consciousness. There are patterns in our consciousness that tell us that this is the way that something ought to be. And if we desire to change, something in our lives, what we must do is we must change the underlying structure. Because what happens is if we do not, and we try to behave in a new direction, we have created that tension that the musician is talking about. We have created the dissonance. There's a part of us that says, this is the way we ought to go, this is what we ought to do. And then the will is saying, no, 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 you're going to do it my way, you're going to go in this direction, and you're going to be a totally new and different person. And there's this tension as we're trying to do that, and this tension is demanding resolution. It is like listening to the note that is just slightly out of harmony, and there's something within us that says, no, 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 this is what the note ought to be. Come play this note. Put me out of my misery. Come and play this. Now we're back in harmony. Now we're back where my mind thinks it ought to be. Now the tension is gone. So what we want to recognize is that we like this idea of being in control. We like this idea of having dominion, but it's just an idea if we don't exercise it. First thing is we have to consciously choose what it is that we would experience. We have to consciously choose what beliefs and ideas we are going to present to the law of mind today for our tomorrow. We need to understand that as we look at our today, our experience of today, if it isn't everything that we hoped it could be, it is because we only hoped that it could be. We didn't necessarily do the things yesterday or the day before that would have led to today being the type of today that we wanted. And we must recognize that if we are to produce a lasting, meaningful change, in our experience, we have to stop working in effect. And we have to start working at the level of cause. We have to go in and we have to change the underlying structure in our subconscious mind. We have to dissolve those patterns in our subconscious mind. We have to let those patterns dissolve in our subconscious mind so that the change will continue on even if our attention drifts away. Because if you go back to the example of the dunking booth, we are both responsible and accountable. No one has the ability to do this for us. No one, except ourselves. We have to accept that whatever we're experiencing today, that is what we are accountable for today, is what we were responsible for yesterday. And if we wish to have a different tomorrow, we need to do, think, behave differently today. We are the only ones responsible, and we are accountable. So we can't blame others. We can't blame our parents for the way they raised us. We can't blame our teachers for the things they taught us. We can't blame our clergy for the way that they preached to us, because all that's in the past. All of that's done. All of that's over. And if we want to have a different tomorrow, we've got to do it today. We can't go back 40 years and change what happened 40 years ago. It is done. It is gone. It is past. But we can do what needs must be today. So Dr. Holmes gives us a very, very simple formula. And I love Dr. Holmes. I was telling Lori this morning that it just amazes me. I can't tell you how many times I've read the textbook and his the little book of essays, Living the Science of Mind. I've read it dozens, if not hundreds of times over in the course of the years since the mid-'80s when I first discovered this teaching. And yet I can pick up his book and I can read it and I say, oh, how beautiful. How simply, how succinctly he was able to put the idea. So here's just a couple of ideas that I want to get on with. Well, how do we make the change? Right? So I hope that by this point we recognize there's a power that responds to us according to our belief, whether we are choosing what we believe or not. Doesn't matter. Just like gravity is working on our bodies, whether we choose to believe gravity is there or not. There's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. It is done unto you as you believe, whether you are consciously aware of what you believe or not. And if you wish to have a different tomorrow, you have to create it today. You can't go back 30 years and change anything, but you can change it today. So what Dr. Holmes tells us is a two-step process, a very simple process, a two-step process. And he says the first thing is we have to be willing to let go of the past. You know, we want to go on this great journey, but we're carrying all of this baggage from our past with us. We're carrying all of these erroneous ideas, these erroneous beliefs, these the anger, the resentment, the all of the stuff that we carry around. And one of the greatest examples of letting go, visual example that I've ever seen, is the opening of the movie The Mission, and it's with Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons. And Robert De Niro is a soldier of fortune in South America in like the 15 or 1600s when the Europeans first went there and both enslaved the native populations and then transported slaves into South America to grow sugar for their wealth. And Robert De Niro's job was, he and a band of soldiers would go out and ride out into the jungles, and they would round up the native populations, and they would bring them back and sell them as slaves to work on the sugar plantations. And there, the Jesuit priests were there, and they were happy to have these people brought in because that gave them the opportunity to teach Christianity to the heathens. This is kind of the setup of the movie. Now, I don't like it, but that's the setup of the movie. I don't like that that's what we have done to one another, to human beings. So in the opening scene of the movie, Robert De Niro is kind of trying to lead his troops up this very, very steep land next to a waterfall, and he's chasing these Aboriginal people into the woods, and you get to see this one chief of the tribe who's just brokenhearted as his people are being killed or captured and sold into slavery. And De Niro goes back into wherever the town was, and he gets his pay for enslaving these people, and he goes and he gets drunk. And in his drunkenness, he gets into a fight with his own brother, and he kills his own brother, stabs his own brother to death. And the court finds him not guilty because the brother started the fight. But De Niro is tormented by what he did. So he goes to Jeremy Irons, who's the head of the Jesuit monastery, and he's trying to find forgiveness. He's trying to find a way to be absolved of the terrible things that he's done. Excuse me. So what De Niro does is he takes all of his artifacts of war, his saddle, his armor, his helmet, his sword, all of these things, and he ties them up in a big cargo net. And he drags this cargo net behind him wherever he goes. Walking through the street, and he's dragging this thing around with him. And one of the younger priests says to Jeremy Irons, he says, "How long are you going to make him drag that around?" And Jeremy Irons says, "He's the only one who can decide. I'm not making him do it. He's making himself do it." Right? He's dragging his past around. So the Jesuits decide to go back up past the waterfall to where the native people live, and they're going to try to convert the native people as they live in their own villages. And as they're trying to get up this steep ground, Robert De Niro keeps getting pulled back by this bag of his past that he is carrying with him. And it looks like he's going to tip over backwards, and he's going to fall into the waterfall, into this tremendous height where surely he would be killed. And as he's struggling to hold on to little branches and little vines, as he's going up the hill, the chief comes out of the bush, and the chief has a knife in his hand. This is the man whose people De Niro had carried off earlier. And the chief puts the knife out, and it looks like he's going to cut De Niro's throat. But instead he cuts the rope that's going over De Niro's shoulder. And this bag of all of his past sins goes tumbling down into the waterfall. If you find that movie on Netflix or somewhere on the internet, just watch the first few minutes until you get to that scene. Because to me, that is kind of one of the best visual examples of letting go. See, we all try to move into a different future and we don't want to let go of the past, right? So the first thing we have to do is assert our dominion. We have to recognize that we are both responsible and accountable, and we have to act as if. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us be glad. Let us rejoice in it. Today, I consciously choose the type of day that I will have. And Dr. Holmes says, then bless the past. Let it go. Learn to forgive. Learn to forgive yourself. Learn to forgive those who have harmed you. Learn to forgive the circumstances. Learn to forgive anything that you are holding resentment for. And by forgiveness, we don't mean say it was okay when it's not okay. By forgiveness, what we mean is recognize that I no longer want that to be a part of my underlying infrastructure. I no longer want that to be something that decides the way that I will act, because I'm trying to act by taking the path of least resistance, by avoiding the things that hurt in the past, by redoing the things that were pleasurable in the past, and I am living my today and my tomorrow based on my past experience, and I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. What I want to do is I want to start with a clean slate today. I want to start fresh. So the first thing that we must do is recognize that we have dominion and assert it. The second thing that we want to do is forgive. We want to forgive. We want to recognize that no matter what happened in the past, we can't go back there and change it. We can't undo it. But we can undo the effect that it is having on us, because our tomorrow doesn't depend on what happened in the past. Our tomorrow depends on what we think and what we believe today. And then we decide, then we choose, well, what kind of a day am I having? What kind of a life am I having? What kind of a tomorrow am I having? And this is praise and thanksgiving. Dr. Holmes says, can we live this day with praise and thanksgiving? Can we be excited about all of the gifts that we are giving and all of the gifts that we are receiving today? Can we be excited? Can we be excited about what God is doing in our lives as us today? Can we be grateful that there is a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief? And if I believe that that power can change the underlying infrastructure of my consciousness, that it will. Very important. I don't want to just change an effect. I don't want to just feel good for a day. I don't want to just be happy for a day. I want to change the underlying cause, the infrastructure of my consciousness that has been causing me to relive, like the movie Groundhog Day, to relive every day as same as yesterday, as yesterday, as yesterday. So we want to come to recognize that the way to change, the way to permanent change, this is what Fritz would tell us, is to create a new path of least resistance. That way, if we try to move in a direction we want to go, there's no tension with the way that we think it ought to be, because we've changed the way that we think it ought to be, and now it is easy and it is natural. And just like that cow putting one foot in front of the other, taking what appeared to be the easiest path for it at the time, we now naturally and easily and effortlessly do the things that allow us to express life the way that we choose to express it. So we come to realize that we have dominion only when we choose to exercise it. Otherwise, we are allowing ourselves to be victims, sitting in a dunking booth, thinking that somebody else is out there trying to stop the balls from hitting the target when there is nobody else out there. That the balls are going to hit the target based on the way that we believed yesterday and the day before and the day before that. We accept dominion because we really don't have any logical choice not to. The law is acting upon our belief, whether we are aware that it is acting upon our belief or whether we consciously choose or not. There's a power for good in the universe, and we can use it, or we can be used by it. Are we consciously choosing, or are we carelessly letting that power work according to yesterday's belief, according to our underlying structures? And now I deliberately choose to change those underlying structures. I choose to forgive. I choose to let go of the past. I choose to realize that my tomorrow is not affected by yesterday, it's affected by today. And today I choose to think and believe of the type of life that I should live. I choose to recognize myself as a spiritual being. I choose to recognize myself as someone who has dominion, is accountable and responsible. I deliberately decide today that I will live my life as the spiritual being that I am. And I recognize that as I make those decisions, as I consciously declare that I am letting go of the past, that I have let go of the past, that I am no longer affected by the past, that what I am doing is putting my intention, my declaration, into that power that responds to me according to my belief. And it is doing what needs must be to change that underlying infrastructure. It is creating a new path of least resistance for me. It is making it easier for me to move in the direction of my life's dreams than it was in the past when I tried to make it happen by sheer willpower alone. I've decided to exercise dominion. I've decided to release and let go of the past. And now I declare what type of future I have decided to express. Of love, of peace, of beauty, of power, of joy, of conscious awareness constantly of the love of God operating through me and as me, of conscious awareness constantly of the fact that what I am thinking and choosing and the way I am talking and what I am nodding my head to when other people are talking, that all of these things are creating my tomorrow, but they're creating it today. And I refuse to create a tomorrow that looks like yesterday. I refuse to create a tomorrow that looks like today, unless today was just absolutely spectacular. I choose a tomorrow that leads me into a deeper experience of God. I choose a tomorrow that leads me into a deeper understanding of my own spiritual nature, excuse me, and of the spiritual nature of the entire universe. I choose a tomorrow where we bless, and I bless each and every person, where I recognize that there's enough and plenty for all who are hungry, where I recognize that there's enough peace for all, excuse me, for all who are at war. I recognize that there's comfort for all who are afraid. So I invite you then this week to live this week truly as the spiritual being that you are, asserting the dominion of that which you have, asserting the dominion that you have over all that you experience, releasing and letting go of the past, deliberately, consciously choosing your future, fulfilling that human longing for the experience of a better tomorrow, fulfilling that human longing of the desire to be in control, fulfilling that spiritual destiny of awakening to our true nature, to allow ourselves to experience God more fully, more completely, more perfectly today and every day. And so it is.